She was cast out in the snow with her baby, until the silent rancher lifted her into his arms. The church bells rang slow and heavy that morning, their sound carrying over the snow-covered streets of Dust Creek. Inside the wooden church, the air smelled of pine and candle smoke. Evelyn sat on the edge of the pew with her baby pressed close to her chest. Her dress was plain but mended with care. The sleeves tugged tight where the fabric had been let out to hide her thinness. She had not eaten well since Lily came into the world 3 weeks earlier, yet she had come here because Daniel had promised. He had promised her marriage, safety, a name to give her daughter, but the pews behind her had begun to empty. Men whispered to their wives, children pulled at their mothers' hands, and the look sent her way carried more pity than kindness. She kept her eyes on the altar, her lips moving in prayer though no words came out. Her hands trembled as she smoothed Lily's shawl. The child stirred, soft whimpers rising against her mother's chest. Evelyn kissed the crown of her head and rocked her gently, praying Daniel would walk through the doors any moment. Instead, Mrs. Thorne came first. Daniel's mother moved with stiff pride down the aisle, her skirts brushing against the wooden floor. Her voice cut the air sharper than the cold outside. "You have humiliated this family enough," she said. Evelyn's throat tightened. She whispered, "He promised me." Mrs. Thorne's eyes narrowed, like ice under winter Sunday. "He is not here," she answered, "and he will not be. We do not take in beggars, and we will not raise another man's child as our own." 2 of Daniel's cousins came from the back, their faces unreadable. Though their movements made clear, they meant to see her gone. One gestured toward the doors. Time to leave. The priest looked away, his silence louder than any sermon he had ever spoken. Evelyn rose, clutching Lily close. She pleaded once more, "Please, just let me stay until he comes." But the cousins took her by the arm and pushed her toward the doors. The wood groaned open, and a blast of wind and snow swept inside, scattering hymn pages and snuffing out a candle. The cold hit Evelyn like a wall. Her shoes slipped on the frozen steps, her knees striking hard. Pain shot up her legs, but she curled her body around Lily, shielding her from the snow. Behind her, the doors slammed shut with a hollow boom. She was outside, alone. Snow stung her face, melted into her hair, soaked her thin dress until the fabric clung heavy to her skin. Her breath came short and sharp. She whispered to Lily, her lips nearly numb, "I thought today would be the start of our life. I thought you would have a father." The baby whimpered, her tiny face pressed against Evelyn's chest, her breaths too quick. Evelyn tried to stand, but her strength gave out. She sank to the steps, the world blurring around her, the wind stealing what little warmth she had left. Somewhere beyond the storm, a horse's hoofbeats echoed faintly. She did not lift her head, not yet. All she could do was hold Lily close and pray someone would come before the snow swallowed them whole. The wind pushed across the white plain, with a voice that sounded like wolves calling. Silas Hole walked beside his horse, the reins loose in his hand, a sack of oats slung over the saddle horn. He had gone into Dust Creek that morning for supplies, and though he had passed the church before, he had not meant to stop. He was a man who kept to himself, living at the edge of Windbreak Ridge, where the snow piled high against his fence and the pine trees groaned under the weight of winter. Most folks in town only knew him as the quiet one, the man who rarely spoke and never lingered. The storm was growing heavier as he climbed the rise near the church, and his horse tossed its head, blowing out a cloud of frost. Silas squinted through the falling snow. At first, he thought it was nothing, just the way snow piled along the steps. But then he saw movement, a small shift in the drift. He slowed, his boots sinking deep, and his heart gave a strange jolt when he saw her. A young woman lay across the steps of the church, her wedding dress soaked through with ice, her arms locked around something bundled close. Silas dropped the reins and hurried forward. The horse followed, restless and stamping, but he did not stop to calm it. He crouched beside her, his gloved hand brushing away snow from her shawl. The girl stirred faintly, her lips pale, her eyes fluttering open just long enough to meet his gaze. "Please," she whispered, her voice little more than breath, "do not leave her." Then her head fell back. Silas pulled the shawl aside and saw the infant. The baby blinked up at him with wide eyes, her breath shallow and fast. She did not cry, and that frightened him more than if she had screamed. He looked at the heavy church doors, but they were closed, dark, silent. No help was coming from inside. His jaw tightened. He slid his arms under the girl and her child, lifting them carefully. She was light, too light, and it twisted something in his chest. He carried them down the steps, the snow closing over his tracks almost as fast as he made them. His horse shied when he mounted, but stilled as Silas settled the girl and her baby in front of him. He wrapped his coat around them, pulling it tight so the wind would not cut through. The baby stirred, a tiny hand reaching out, curling against the fabric of his shirt. He let out a slow breath and nudged the horse forward. The church bell tolled once more, the sound hollow and final. But Silas did not look back. The storm swallowed the road, erasing every sign of what had happened. He leaned low, his arms steady around the girl and her child, and rode into the white silence, carrying them toward the only place he had to offer, a small cabin at the foot of Windbreak Ridge, where the fire still burned and no one asked questions. The cabin smelled of smoke and pine when Evelyn opened her eyes. At first, she thought she was dreaming, for she felt warmth against her skin and a weight of wool pulled up to her chin. Her last memory was the cold steps of the church, the sharp sting of snow against her face, and then a shadow bending over her. She blinked, her vision clearing, and saw rough plank walls lit by the flicker of firelight. A small window showed nothing but white, snow pressed tight against the glass. For a long moment she lay still, listening to the crackle of the flames and the soft wheeze of her daughter, asleep nearby. When she turned her head, she saw Lily bundled close to the hearth, wrapped in her shawl, her tiny chest rising and falling. Evelyn's heart loosened a little, though her arms ached with the memory of clutching her baby through the storm. She tried to sit, but a groan escaped her lips, her body still sore and heavy from birth. The blanket slipped, and she caught it quickly, drawing it tight again. She did not know where she was or who had brought her here. The door opened suddenly, and a gust of cold swept in. A tall man stepped inside, snow sliding off his shoulders as he shut the door behind him. He carried an armful of firewood, his hands bare and raw from the wind. He stomped his boots on the threshold, then turned toward the stove. When he noticed her eyes on him, he paused. "You're awake," he said, in a voice low and steady. Evelyn clutched the blanket tighter, her throat dry. "Where am I?" she whispered. "My place," he answered simply, setting the wood down by the fire. "You passed out." Her gaze flicked to Lily, then back to him. "And my baby?" she asked quickly. "Still in one piece," he said, a faint trace of tired humor in his words. "Loud, but alive." Evelyn narrowed her eyes. "Why did you bring us here, stranger?" He shrugged as he crouched near the stove, adding another log. "Didn't seem right, leaving you there. You don't even know me." "No." "Maybe you should have walked on by," she said, her voice sharp though weak. "Could have," he answered, "but didn't." She studied him quietly. His face was rough with days of stubble, his eyes the color of slate under the firelight. He was broad-shouldered, his hands worn from work, yet there was nothing unkind in his manner. The cabin itself was plain, no lace or softness anywhere, just tools stacked neat, a chair by the window, and a saddle resting in the corner. A Bible sat on the sill, its cover faded. "Do you live here alone?" she asked. He nodded. "Me and Boone." At the sound of his name, a shaggy old dog lifted its head from beside the hearth, gave a low wag of the tail, then settled again. Evelyn looked back at Lily and whispered, "How long can we stay?" The man met her gaze without shifting. "As long as you need," he said. "Ain't much here, but it's warm." Her eyes stung, though she kept her voice steady. "We will not be trouble." "You already are," he replied. Then after a pause added, "That's all right." The snow did not let up for days. The wind clawed at the windows and rattled the chimney until it seemed the whole house might be swallowed by the storm. Inside, Evelyn's strength began to slip away. At first, she thought it was nothing more than the tiredness that came from sleepless nights. But soon her skin grew hot, her breath heavy, and her body shook with chills. She tried to rise from the cot, but her legs would not hold her, and she sank back under the weight of the wool blanket. Her cheeks burned while her hands trembled, and though she whispered to Lily that she was fine, she knew she was not. Silas noticed, though he said little. That night he set a bowl of steaming broth by her bed, the smell plain but warm. "You need to eat," he said. "I cannot," she whispered, turning her face away. "You are not fine," he told her, his voice quiet but steady. He lifted the spoon himself and held it out to her. At first she refused, but when her hands shook too badly to lift it, she let him feed her. The broth was too salty, a little burnt, but it was warm, and each swallow gave her a little more strength. He did not ask questions, did not scold, only kept watch. Through the long nights when Evelyn could not rise, Silas kept the fire alive, bringing in wood until his shoulders sagged. He boiled water and laid cool cloths across her brow. He carried Lily awkwardly at first, his big hands uncertain with such a tiny weight, but he kept her close when Evelyn could not. The child cried loud and long, her small fists thrashing, and Evelyn wept with frustration when she could not quiet her. Silas only said, "Let me take her." His arms were stiff, his movements slow, but when he wrapped her in his coat and stepped outside into the night, his voice carried in low murmurs that the wind could not steal. Evelyn dragged herself to the window once and saw him there, riding slow circles under the pale moon, the baby pressed close to his chest. He did not sing, only spoke softly, and after a while Lily's cries faded into quiet breaths. Evelyn pressed her palm to the cold glass, tears burning her eyes. No one had ever done something like that for her, not even Daniel. Her fever rose and fell with the passing of days, until she lost count of how many nights had gone by. But Silas did not falter. He cooked, though clumsy with a pan, and when Lily spit up on his shirt, he only wiped it away. Boone, the old dog, followed him from room to room, as though guarding him in his strange new duty. At last, near the end of the week, the firelight blurred less, and Evelyn woke to find her fever broken. She saw Silas dozing by the hearth, Lily's tiny shirt in his hands, as he mended a tear with thread thick and uneven. The sight of him there, quiet and patient, holding together what mattered to her, made something deep in her chest ache with a warmth she had nearly forgotten. The fever left Evelyn weak, but when her strength returned, she could no longer hold the words inside her. She sat near the fire, with Lily bundled against her chest, the crackle of the flames the only sound in the cabin. Silas was at the table, sharpening a small knife, his movements steady and careful. She had watched him work in silence for days, but now the heaviness in her heart pressed too much to bear. She spoke his name softly, as though testing if he would turn. He did not, but she saw the way his shoulders shifted, and she went on. "He promised me," she said, her voice shaking. "Daniel promised me a wedding, a home, a father for my child. He told me he loved me. On the morning of the vows he was gone, and his family told me I had made it all up." Her eyes stung as she remembered the sting of cold on the church steps, the sharp words of Daniel's mother. "They called me a liar, said Lily was not his, that I was a fool who had trapped him." Her breath caught and she bent her head over her baby. "Perhaps I was just foolish," she whispered. Silas set down the knife slowly and turned toward the fire. His face was unreadable in the shifting light, but his voice, when it came, was quiet. "That does not make you wrong. It only makes you human." Evelyn blinked at the words. No man had ever said such a thing to her before. She opened her mouth to answer, but nothing came, so she only held Lily closer and let the silence stretch. After a long while she asked him, "Why did you take us in? You do not seem the kind of man who invites strangers into his home." Silas leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees. "I don't," he said. "Then why?" she pressed. He did not answer at once, and when he did, his voice was low. "My sister Clara died 2 winters ago, when fever swept the town. She was 16. Evelyn lifted her head, startled by the rawness of his words. "I am sorry," she whispered. Silas nodded, eyes fixed on the fire. "She used to read to me, told me the world was bigger than fences and chores. When she died, everything grew small again. He hesitated, then looked at Evelyn. When I saw you in the snow, holding that child, like she was all you had left, it reminded me of her. Not your face, but the way you would not let go. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Evelyn felt her throat close with a strange ache. She wanted to say thank you, yet the words felt too small. Instead, she looked down at Lily, who slept in peace against her shoulder. For the first time since Daniel left her, she did not feel entirely alone. Silas turned back to the hearth, the silence between them no longer empty, but filled with something unspoken, something that gave her a faint sense of hope, like the first hint of spring beneath the snow. The snow softened as March crept on, though the air was still sharp and the trees stood bare against the pale sky. Inside the cabin, life had begun to fall into a rhythm. Evelyn moved about the small space with a little more strength each day, mending her dress by the fire, washing Lily's shawl, or stirring a pot of beans while Silas worked in the barn. The silence between them was not so heavy now. It was filled with small things: the sound of Lily's soft coos, the scrape of Silas's boots across the floor, the creak of the old dog shifting near the hearth. Evelyn never asked what he did with his hours outside, though she noticed the way wood shavings clung to his sleeves when he returned. One afternoon she came back from the river, with her arms heavy from washing, the cold water still burning her skin. As she climbed the steps to the porch, she stopped short. There, set against the wall, stood a cradle. It was simple, made from pine boards, smoothed and rounded by hand, but it was steady and strong. The curve of the headboard caught the last of the light, and carved there, careful and uneven, was a single word: Lily. Evelyn's knees weakened, and she nearly dropped the bundle of clothes in her arms. She set them aside and reached out, her fingers tracing the letters. Each cut of the knife was deep, as though pressed in with care, and though the carving was not perfect, it was beautiful. She sat on the step, her chest aching, and tears slipped hot down her face. "Lily," she whispered, her voice breaking, "he made this for you." Silas came around the corner then, carrying an axe on his shoulder. He paused when he saw her, his eyes flicking from the cradle to her face. He set the axe down and rubbed the back of his neck, almost uneasy. "Thought she could use something better than a bundle of quilts," he muttered. Evelyn could not speak at first. Her throat was too tight, her heart too full. She looked up at him, the firelight from the window catching the edges of his rough features, and for the first time, she did not see only the stranger who had carried her from the snow. She saw a man who had carved her daughter's name into wood with his own hands. She gathered Lily from her shawl and laid her gently in the cradle. The baby shifted, gave a soft sigh, and settled into the hollow as though she had always belonged there. Evelyn brushed her hand across her daughter's cheek, then rested her palm on the smooth pine. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice raw with feeling. Silas only nodded, his gaze steady and unreadable, but she saw the way his hand lingered on the wood as he turned to go back to his work. Evelyn sat there long after, listening to the quiet, her tears drying on her cheeks, her heart cracked open in a way she had not thought possible again. The snow had thinned into slush by the middle of March, the road to Dust Creek muddy under wagon wheels and boots. Evelyn had avoided the town since that bitter morning at the church, but her flour sack was empty, and Lily needed cloth she could not sew from scraps. Silas hitched his horse to the wagon at dawn, his movements steady and quiet, while Evelyn wrapped Lily in her shawl. She hesitated on the porch, her heart pounding as she looked out at the road. Silas only gave a small nod, as if to say nothing more than it was time. The ride into town was silent, except for the creak of wheels and the cry of crows overhead. Evelyn held Lily close, her fingers trembling inside her gloves. When they reached Main Street, the sound of hammers and voices filled the air. Yet everything seemed to still when people turned their heads. Women in bonnets whispered behind gloved hands, their eyes darting from Evelyn's face to the baby in her arms. Men paused at the hitching posts, their mouths tight as they tipped their hats without warmth. Evelyn felt the weight of every glance. Her cheeks burned, though the air was cold, and she wished the shawl were large enough to hide both herself and her child. She stepped down from the wagon, her knees unsteady, But Silas was there, offering his arm without a word. She gripped it, grateful though she did not say so, and together they walked into the store. Inside, the heat from the stove was stifling after the chill outdoors. Mr. Garrison, the storekeeper, glanced up from his ledger. For a moment his expression softened, but when his gaze shifted to Lily, his mouth pressed thin. "What'll it be?" he asked briskly. Evelyn cleared her throat. "Flour," she said, "and cloth, if you have any." Her voice cracked, but she forced it steady. "Mr. Garrison nodded and went to fetch the items, though his eyes flicked once more to Silas, then away. Evelyn heard the whispers even through the walls. A pair of women had followed them in, pretending to sort through jars of preserves. "That's her," one murmured, the girl left at the altar. "And that baby, did you see?" The other gave a sharp sniff. "Living with him now, the quiet one up by the ridge." "Shameful," she said. Evelyn's hands clenched tighter around Lily, and she turned her face away, praying the words would not pierce so deep. When they stepped back outside, the stares continued, but Silas moved with the same steady pace as always. He did not glance left or right, did not flinch at the whispers. His silence was a wall, and Evelyn felt herself lean into it, drawing strength from his unshaken steps. As they climbed back into the wagon, she dared to look around once more. Some turned away, but a few held her gaze, their eyes filled with judgment she could not bear. She swallowed hard, biting back tears. On the road home, the sky turned gold with late light. Evelyn sat in silence, but inside her heart ached. She realized the world would not forget what had happened, and neither would it forgive. Yet when she looked at Silas, his face calm as the horizon, she felt a steadiness settle inside her. The whispers could not follow her into his cabin, not into the firelight where Lily slept in the cradle carved by his hands. The morning was bright and cold, the kind of spring day when the snow melted just enough to leave the yard muddy, though patches of frost still clung to the fence posts. Evelyn had been rocking Lily near the window, humming softly, when she heard the sound of wheels crunching over the frozen earth. She froze, her breath catching in her throat, for the carriage that came into view was polished black, its wheels sharp and gleaming. It did not belong to Dust Creek. It belonged to the Harrows. The door of the carriage opened with care, and Margaret Harrow stepped down. Her coat was dark green, every button shining like silver, her shoes untouched by mud as though the ground itself dared not stain her. Her gray hair was pinned in a perfect knot beneath a feathered hat, her chin lifted with the pride of a woman who had never been turned away from any door. Evelyn's knees weakened as she rose from the chair, clutching Lily close. Silas was out back, splitting wood, but when he heard the wheels, he came around the side of the house, the axe still in his hand. He set it down slowly and wiped his palms against his trousers. Margaret did not wait for a greeting. She walked to the porch steps and looked past Evelyn into the cabin, her eyes settling on the cradle carved from pine. "I came," she said, her voice crisp, "to see the child." Evelyn stepped forward, holding Lily tighter. "She is not yours," she whispered, though her voice shook. Margaret's eyes narrowed, but her tone was smooth. "I never said she was. But Daniel was my son, and though he is gone, his blood lives in that child. That makes her ours. She belongs with family, with people who can raise her properly, not in this place." Evelyn's arms trembled as she pulled Lily against her chest. "No," she whispered again, stronger this time. "Do not be foolish, girl," Margaret snapped, her patience breaking. "You think raising her here in dirt and horse stench is kindness." She reached forward, but before her hand could touch the shawl, Silas stepped onto the porch. He said nothing, only stood between them, his broad shoulders filling the space, his eyes fixed on Margaret with the stillness of a mountain. For a moment even Margaret faltered. "Mr. Hole," she said at last, adjusting her gloves with a sharp tug, "you may think this arrangement charming, but it is improper. This girl is not your wife, and that child is not your daughter." Her voice rang hard, but Silas did not move. His silence pressed heavy, stronger than any words. Margaret's gaze flicked between him and Evelyn, then back to Lily. "I see," she said finally, her tone like frost. "You will regret this." She turned with military precision, and climbed back into the carriage. The driver snapped the reins, and the wheels rolled away, leaving only ruts in the mud and a hush across the yard. Silas stood at the top of the steps, his arms loose at his sides, but his gaze fixed on the gate long after the carriage had vanished. Evelyn stood behind him, her heart pounding as she clutched her child. She wanted to speak, but no words came, so she simply looked at him, and in his silence she understood he would not let Lily be taken. Not now, not ever. The days after Margaret's visit passed in a silence that was not empty, but full of unspoken things. Evelyn went about her work in the cabin, tending to Lily, stirring pots over the fire, mending shirts with uneven stitches. Silas kept to his chores, chopping wood, mending fences, moving through the rhythm of ranch life as though nothing had changed. Yet every time Evelyn looked at him, she remembered the way he had stood on the porch, immovable as stone, and the memory sent a warmth through her chest that she did not know how to name. One evening, the wind rattled the shutters, while the fire glowed low in the stove. Lily was asleep in her cradle, her tiny breaths rising and falling in the stillness. Evelyn sat in the rocking chair with a basket of mending, her needle pulling slow, her eyes heavy with weariness. Silas worked nearby, sanding the edge of a drawer he was making, the steady scrape of wood filling the silence. The sound was strangely comforting, like a heartbeat against the quiet of the room. Her hand slipped and she pricked her finger, a small bead of blood welling on her skin. She hissed softly and pressed the finger to her lips. Silas looked up, his brow furrowing, and set down the wood. "You all right?" he asked. Evelyn nodded, embarrassed, though her cheeks flushed under his gaze. "Just a slip," she said. She bent back over her work, but her hands shook, and the thread knotted. Frustration welled in her throat. Silas stood and came closer, crouching beside her chair. "Let me," he said, reaching for the tangled thread. His fingers were rough and broad, yet when they brushed hers they were careful, almost tender. Evelyn's breath caught. She watched him unknot the thread with quiet patience, the firelight painting shadows across his face. When he looked up, their eyes met, and neither moved. The room seemed to still. The fire crackled softer, and the world outside vanished. Evelyn's heart pounded so loud she thought he must hear it. She had not meant to reach for him, yet her hand lifted on its own, brushing against his knuckles. His hand stilled beneath hers, and for a long moment they stayed like that, their hands resting together as though they had always belonged. Then she leaned forward, not planned, not thought, only drawn by something deeper than words. Her lips touched his, light as breath, no more than a whisper of warmth. Silas did not pull away. The kiss lingered, soft and trembling, before they parted. Neither of them smiled, neither laughed. They simply looked at each other, their faces close, their breaths mingling in the glow of the fire. Evelyn's hand trembled as she pulled back, her cheeks burning. Silas sat still, his jaw tight, his eyes unreadable. Yet there was no coldness there. Instead there was something steady, something certain, though unspoken. She turned her face toward the cradle where Lily slept peacefully, her tiny fist curled by her cheek. And when she looked back at Silas, she saw it clear. The snow that had once buried her heart had begun to melt, and in its place warmth had taken root. The thaw came slow that spring, the ground softening a little each day as streams broke free from their cages of ice. By April, the cottonwoods along the creek had begun to show the first pale leaves, and the air smelled faintly of earth instead of snow. Evelyn stood at the doorway of the cabin one morning, Lily balanced on her hip, and watched Silas drive fence posts into the soil. The steady rhythm of his hammer echoed across the yard, and she felt a strange peace in it, the sound of a man building something meant to last. It was Martha who first spoke of vows. She came by with a pie in her hands and a knowing look in her eye. "Spring is here," she said, "and so is a traveling minister. There is a spot by the creek, quiet, full of lilacs, perfect for vows." Evelyn had flushed and looked away, but her heart had leapt at the thought. Silas said nothing, yet when his eyes met hers across the room, there was no denial in them, only a quiet acceptance, as though the decision had already been made long ago when he carried her from the church steps. The morning they walked to the creek, the sun was bright but gentle, the air cool against their faces. Martha carried Lily, who gurgled and reached her hands toward the branches overhead. Silas wore his Sunday shirt, clean and pressed, with a sprig of lilac tucked into the collar. Evelyn wore her mended dress, the one she had stitched carefully by firelight. Her hair was drawn back in soft curls, and though she had nothing fine to offer, she had never felt more herself. The minister stood by the water with a Bible in his hand. His voice was kind, though simple, for he seemed to sense that the two before him needed no long speech. They already knew what it meant to stay, to weather storms, to keep faith with one another without words. He nodded at Silas to speak, and for a moment Silas faltered, as though unused to shaping his thoughts into sound. But then he lifted his eyes and said, "She came with the snow. For a long time I thought the snow was all there was, quiet and cold." He paused, his voice rough but steady. "But she brought life into this place, laughter, fire, a child's breath against my chest. She made it a home again." His eyes found Evelyn's. "She came with the snow, but I knew from the start she was warmth." Evelyn's vision blurred as tears filled her eyes. She gripped his hand tighter, her heart swelling so full it hurt. The minister's words were brief, his blessing spoken over them, and then it was done. They kissed gently, not for show, but because it was the only promise they needed. There was no crowd to cheer, only the rustle of leaves and the sound of water rushing past. Martha smiled through her own tears as she placed Lily back in Evelyn's arms. As they walked home, Evelyn slipped her hand into Silas's. He leaned close, his voice low and certain. "You are safe now." She rested her head against his shoulder, smiling through her tears. The world might still whisper, but here beside him she no longer feared it. They had named their home, with vows spoken under cottonwoods and sky, and that was enough. The summer sun spread gold across the valley, the tall grass bending in the wind while chickens darted about the yard. Lily had grown fast in those months since the vows by the creek, her small legs learning to stumble across the dirt, her laugh carrying through the cabin like music. Evelyn watched from the porch swing with a basket of mending in her lap, her heart swelling each time Lily's bright giggle rang out. Silas was stacking wood nearby, his shirt damp with sweat, his movements steady as ever. The old dog dozed in the shade of the barn, his tail twitching in dreams. Lily toddled from the porch, her little bonnet crooked over her curls, and made straight for Silas. Her tiny hands clutched at his trouser leg, and she looked up with eyes full of light. "Daddy," she said, the word clear as morning bells. Silas froze, his hands stilled on the wood, his jaw tightened, and for a long moment he did not move at all. Evelyn's sewing slipped from her fingers as her breath caught in her throat. She had waited for this, dreamed of it, but had never spoken of it aloud, for fear it might never come. Lily laughed again, tugging at him with insistence. "Daddy," she said once more, as if the name belonged to him and no other. Silas turned away quickly, his wide shoulders stiff, and busied himself with the neat stack of logs, though his hands shook faintly. Evelyn rose from the porch and came near, her eyes soft, her voice tender. "She knows," she whispered, resting a hand on his back. Silas swallowed hard, then lifted his hand and set it gently on Lily's head. He still did not speak, but the way his fingers lingered there told her everything his voice could not. The moment held steady, the summer air wrapping them in warmth. Evelyn felt tears sting her eyes, yet they were not the bitter tears she had shed in the snow. These were bright, full of something new. She bent down and kissed the top of Lily's curls, then looked at Silas. He glanced at her, his eyes unreadable but shining, and she knew. He had not only taken them in, not only kept them safe, he had claimed them as his own, whether or not he ever said it aloud. Evening settled across the land, painting the sky with streaks of pink and orange. The family ate supper at the small wooden table, Lily perched between them with bread in her hand. She babbled happily, crumbs on her chin, and every now and then she repeated the word, as if to remind them both that she knew the truth. "Daddy." Evelyn smiled across the table, and Silas lowered his head, pretending to busy himself with his meal. but she saw the way his lips curved, just barely. The cabin was filled with warmth that night, not only from the fire, but from the sound of their laughter, from the small voice that had named the man who had once lived in silence. Evelyn looked at him and thought, at last, they were home. If this story touched your heart, partner, subscribe to Western Love Legends, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Every word you share keeps frontier love alive. And remember, if a chicken steals your bonnet, it's best to just let it go, because chasing it never ends well.